Hello everyone, Reil here, joined today by a couple of pandas. Today I just wanted to talk about the character sheets for Embers of the Imperium. So in case you have been following along, Edge Studio just released their Embers of the Imperium source book, which goes in tandem with the Genesys Core Rulebook. So just a heads up, if you're looking at Embers of the Imperium, you do need the Genesys Core Rulebook as well. But I thought I would just have a quick look at the characters, like how the character sheet works and how the characters on Embers of the Imperium kind of go along with that. Just if you're unfamiliar with the system and you're thinking about buying it, but don't know if you want to pull the trigger, then, this will just doing some videos so you can have a kind of a quick look what's going on. So let me bring that up. All right, so this is the core rulebook, the Genesys Core Rulebook blank character sheet. So I just kind of want to go a quick run through here to kind of talk about what everything is. And so obviously you have your name of your character, which you just come up with, your species or archetype. And so if I go over here to the Embers of the Imperium book, we have Letnev, Hylar, Human, Hakan, Drua, which is, the Nalu, the Krius. Okay, so not every one is in here, but quite a few are in here from the game. The Shikrai, the Titans, the Winu, the Israel, the Ixja. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce Ixja. Okay, let's go with Letnev for our examples here. Okay, so if we go back to this character sheet, so picking one of those is what go into that, and they'll each have kind of their own unique abilities and sometimes weaknesses. So career, your career kind of determines which of these skills down below would be career skills, and we'll take a look at that in a second. And then player, if you want to keep track of who's whom. I don't know anybody who ever bothers with that. So if you've ever played something like D&D, you're probably familiar with the concept of a character sheet, but there's going to be a few things here that are different. One of those is soak. And so in a game like D&D, when you're in combat, and you wear armor, the armor kind of determines how hard you are to hit. But it doesn't reduce damage once you are hit. And so in the Genesys system, it's a little bit different. The armor doesn't necessarily make you harder to hit. It can, because it also adds defense, and we'll get to that. But it also adds soak. And so what that is your soak value is going to be your brawn, or your physical size and mass and power. Plus any armor you're wearing can soak damage. So armor may make you harder to hit, but mostly what it's doing is soaking damage. So let's say you get shot by a blaster for 8 damage and you have 4 soak, then you're taking 4 damage. So that's your soak value. So that'd be your brawn plus your armor. Soak. Wounds. So you have a wound threshold, which is basically your hit point value. That's how many wounds you can take before you go unconscious, and take critical wounds every time you hit your wound threshold. And those can accumulate. You don't die by direct damage, but you die if your criticals get so high that a critical injury roll will kill you. You kind of have 2 health totals. You have your wounds health total, and that's more what you'd think about direct damage, like getting stabbed or shot or something like that. But then they also have a strain threshold. And so what strain is emotional or physical stress. So it could be something like, long-term endurance, like hiking all day and night. And so your body becomes physically exhausted, or it could be high stress situation. It could be environmental, like it's very, very hot, very, very cold. So you're not to the point where it's going to physically damage you, but can really take a lot out of your person. So that can also incapacitate you if you get enough of that damage to hit your strain threshold, but it's much easier to recover. Generally, a good night's rest is going to get you out of that. And then the 4th one over here is your defense. And so that's can be certain feats, which in this game are called talents, but also certain weapons and armor can add defense. And what those do is they add a black die to however many to the attacker. So when they try to hit you, it does make you harder to hit. And so a lot of armors will have, like, for example, maybe 1 soak value and 1 defense value. So we'll add 1 to your soak, but also a die to your defense. Okay, most importantly here is characteristics. And so we have, just like in D&D, there are 6 characteristics, but they're broken up a little bit differently. It's kind of interesting in this. So in D&D, you have, I would say, 3 physical traits and 3 kind of mental or social traits. So you have strength, dexterity, and constitution, which in some way represents physical prowess and stamina. And you have your wisdom, intelligence, and charisma, which are kind of more mental. This one, you kind of only really have 2 straight physical ones. So you have brawn and agility. So brawn is kind of the combination of your strength and constitution. So it's like your physical build, your resistance to disease, stuff like that. It's kind of all tied to your brawn. Your agility is basically your dexterity, your coordination, your balance. I think that one runs pretty similar. What's interesting is they've kind of broken intellect into 2, maybe, because you have intellect and cunning. So intellect is kind of more your ability to recall information, your ability to plan for future events, and strategize, that sort of thing. But then you have cunning, which is kind of more like your quick wit, your ability to very, quickly assess a situation, figure out how to respond to it. And so intellect, you could be very smart intellectually, but also be very slow on the spot, or vice versa. You could be kind of a dimwit in terms of book knowledge and strategy, but you're just quick on your feet, right? So you kind of your streets, I guess street smarts would be a good way to explain cunning. So yeah, let's say intellect is kind of your book smarts, cunning is more your street smarts. Willpower is kind of your strength of will, kind of self-explanatory. So how well can you resist the influence of others or exert influence over others? How well can you push yourself through difficult situations and that sort of thing? And then presence is more or less your charisma. So how commanding of a personality are you? With how much ease can you converse with others? But a little different thing with all of these characteristics is how the numbers work. So in something like D&D, you're getting like 3D. Essentially, you're going to have a score between technically 3 and 18, but then it can vary. But generally, like around 10 to 12, and you're going to have a couple higher scores. In this game, the Genesys system, you have a score up to 5, so it's 1 through 5. So let's take a look at the Embers character list here. So we have our Letniv character, and I'll just see if I can zoom in a little on the okay, I guess we could do Nor too, but all right. So the Letniv has a brawn of 2, which is fairly average. Like an average human would be just 2s across the board. So in terms of brawn, a Letniv, who's basically a space elf, they have a pretty equivalent brawn in agility and intellect to humans, but they're not quite as cunning. They're a little bit slower on their feet. They're more kind of the prodding, planning strategist sorts, I guess. And they're not really taught or trained to think for themselves, maybe the same way humans are, because they're kind of a very militaristic, rigid society. But they have very strong willpower. So they have higher than average willpower, and then their presence is about the same. And this is kind of interesting how this works. So this wouldn't be your character's total. So you'll notice here, if you look down at what the Letniv character has to begin with, this is the base score. And let's skip down to point 3 here, where it says starting experience 100. So during character creation, you don't roll dice or anything to get your stats. What you're going to do is you spend experience. And you can spend the experience on things like your talents, on skills, or on creation only, on increasing your starting stats. And so that's what's very important to remember, because every time you play, you get more and more experience, but your game earned experience can only apply to things like talents and skills. You can never go back and boost up your stats, your base stats, except through certain high level talents. And so you really want to spend as much of your starting experience as you can boosting your starting skills. So how you do that, so I was pointing at it and I realized you can't see my finger there. So let's say I have my brawn here of 2, and I want to start that a little higher. So to take my 2 to a 3, you would take the next step. So it's 2 to 3, so 3 times 10 is 30. So it would cost 30 of the starting experience to go from Brawn 2 to Brawn 3. And then if I wanted to go from 2 to 4, I would have to spend 30 to go to 3 and then 40 to go to 4. So that'd be a total of 70. So I can't start with 5 in Brawn for my Letnev. So they're just not as physically capable as some of the others. Now let's actually roll down to the Nor. So now you look at the Nor, he starts with a 3, but he only starts with 85 experience because he's got other, they kind of compensate for other starting abilities you have. So he actually won't be able to get to 5 either, because he's going to be 5 experience short, because he needs 40 to get from 3 to 4 and then another 50 to get from 4 to 5. So it's kind of hard to get up to 5 without getting the talents, or the feats talents, sorry. But now the Letnev here though could get to 5 willpower, because that would cost again 90 to spend then, but then nothing else is going up. So you kind of have to mix and match, like what do you want your character to really be good at. And I'll talk about why this is important when we go back to the character sheet. So that's how your XP is spent. You want to probably spend as much of that as you can on character, your abilities here, character creation. But also you have different races or different different types of characters will have different starting wound thresholds. So there's basically your hit points for wounds. Oh my goodness, I'm having a hard time highlighting things. So for the Letnev, it's 10 plus Brawn. So let's say I leave the Brawn at 2. My starting wound threshold is 12. And whereas with the Nor, it's 12 plus Brawn. So the default starting would be 15. Okay, strain threshold. Okay, so we got 10 plus willpower. So for the Letnev is going to be 13. So 10 plus 3. But the Nor, only 8, right? So the Letnev is going to be much more, they're not so physically resilient, but in a high stress mental situation will fare a lot better. Letnevs start with a couple extra abilities here. So we have starting skills. They get a free rank in a combat ability of their choice. And they have something called unmatched arrogance, which means when they make leadership or coercion checks, they have an automatic success to their result. And when they make a charm or negotiation check, they actually add a threat. So they're really good at coercion and leadership. They're not very charming, and they're not good at negotiating. Okay, so that's just kind of how that works. So let's go back to the character sheet. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to scroll down that far. Let's zoom in a little bit on the skills. Okay, so the skills here are all tied to the characteristics, and I keep calling them traits. So for example, alchemy, which may or may not come up a lot in Embers of the Imperium, is an intelligence. Now, astrocartography, you're probably going to run into a lot more, and that's the ability to navigate with stars, right? And so that's an intelligence check. So let's say I was my intellect 2 Letnev. If I ever had to make an astrocartography check, I would be rolling a limit of 2 dice. Now, each of these pips on the rank demonstrates my proficiency, and so every time I buy a proficiency in it, I go up 1 rank. But there's no point having my rank be higher than the characteristic that it represents. So if I took 3 ranks in astrocartography, so what ranks do is they upgrade your dice on a roll. So I could make an astrocartography check even if I'm not proficient in it, but I'd be rolling 2 green dice, which are the medium kind of dice. But if I train in it, then I can upgrade those to yellow dice. But I can never have more than my intellect worth of dice. So if I have a 2 intellect and a 3 proficiency, that 3rd rank is useless because I can still only roll 2 dice because my intellect is only 2. So it's kind of like you have a cap on your physical ability. So extra training doesn't really help you if you're like by nature much smaller. Like the strongest house cat in the world is nothing compared to an elephant, right? So there's just like a physical cap you have, or mental cap. And then you can see stuff like, driving, piloting is a big one. Of course, you're gonna be flying a lot of spaceships. So that's an agility skill, the ability to weave in and out of asteroid fields. Perception, being, quick to notice things, that's cunning based. A lot of your physical, like your close range combat is going to be brawn. A lot of your ranged combat is going to be agility. Social skills or presence. There's all sorts: presence, will, power, and cunning. I know Embers of the Imperium, it only lists one knowledge skill here in the knowledge skill section. The book for Embers of the Imperium does add a few more. All right, so basically when you're on your character creation, your career, you're going to choose like a career path, and that'll tell you which of these are your, okay, first of all, setting. So you probably color this in, like if you're not going to use alchemy, like why would you use alchemy? And I don't know why you would use alchemy in Embers of the Imperium. So you probably just have these, the ones you're going to use marked off. And then whether or not it's a career. And the reason you'd want to make something a career skill is because it makes the ranks cheaper when you spend experience to level those up. But you can typically buy in anything. It just gets more expensive if it's not a career skill. All right, let's roll down. Oh, sorry, too far. Weapons. So weapons, this has the stats of a weapon. Again, we're not going to go in super detail, but in general, you'll have the name of your weapon here, the skill it's applied to. So a light blaster would be ranged light. The damage, so your weapon will have a base damage. So it's a solid number, it's a flat number, but your die roll when you attack will be added to that number. So if you have a gun with a damage of 6 and you roll 3 successes on a shot, you're actually doing 9 damage minus their soak. All right, a crit weapon, crit rating is that when you hit a certain number of advantage on a roll, as long as you did at least, well, as long as you hit, then you can spend your advantage on critical, which is an injury. So critical injury. So let's say you have again, your light blaster, it's 6 damage, but if for every 4 advantage, then you can cause an injury. So there's a critical injury table I won't get into on this video. So if you hit the target, then I think you have to probably do at least 1 damage, and then you can also have the critical injury. The range, this is different than something like D&D where they kind of measure in squares of 5 feet. So in the Genesys system, you just have range bands. So it's either like you're engaged, like you're basically touching your hand-to-hand combat, or your close range, which is up to, I can't remember the distances, like let's say within 20 feet or so. And then you have long range, very long range, extreme range. So you have just different range bands. And so the far, your weapon might only shoot medium range. So if somebody's outside of that, you're not going to be able to shoot at them unless you move in closer. And then special would be any special abilities your weapon has. So that could be something like Pierce, which helps ignore some soak, or it could be burn effects, or it could be special. There's some weapons have special effects that you can spend advantage to trigger, like a blast. So a grenade will often have, like, for every 2 advantage, hit an adjacent target, So if you roll a 6 advantage, you could hit 3 targets adjacent to your main target with that grenade. Okay, and then down here you have your total XP. So that is how much you've earned throughout the life of your character, and available. So that's just how much you haven't spent yet. So often you might want to save those up to get some, high level talents or something like that. And then page 2. We have, these are just kind of motivations, your character. The book, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the books, it's kind of like fleshing out your character's motivations and things. Like what are they working towards? So they have their own personal agendas. And so it's kind of like, what are your strengths, flaws, desires, fears? So it's just the personality kind of your character getting fleshed out, the physical characteristics over here, illustration and description, money, weapons, armor. Okay, so pretty standard. What do you have on your person? This is your critical injury table. So you'll see it has a severity on it. So the severity of the critical injury determines how difficult it is to treat. And you can only treat 1 injury per, like, if you try to treat an injury and fail, I think you have to wait a week to try again. And then, what it does to you. Oh, sorry, there was a talent. So this is not talents. This is the first one here, special abilities. So for example, the one we were looking at here, the Letnev, has the unmatched arrogance. So you'd write that in here, and then the reference number and maybe a brief description what it does. And then the talents, and talents are, if you're familiar with D&D, are basically feats. There's a certain pattern you have to buy them in. They get more expensive the more right they are on this sheet, but you can never buy one unless you have more on the one before it. Or yeah, like I can't buy a level 2, sorry, I can't buy one of these tier 2 talents unless this one's full. and I can't buy this third talent unless these two are full, and I can't buy this fourth one unless these three are full. So however I describe that, you have to fill up, you have to have at least a certain number before you can get the next level of one. So there's little arrows that kind of show you I don't know, it's kind of complicated. I mean, it's not really, I'm not explaining it well, but anyways, so there's a chart you do. All right, so that is the basics of the characters and how they work. So let's just, if you're interested, I mean, that's basically all we wanted to say. I just kind of want to look, if anybody's interested, a little more detail at each of the types of characters you can get in Embers of the Imperium. Okay, so this is the select a species. So let's just take a look. So we have the Ghosts of Creus. So just a quick glance here. Low brawn, high willpower. They start with vigilance, which is an ability to use, like, so it prevents you get better initiative if you're surprised, if you have good vigilance. But kind of there's two initiatives in this system. So you have cool and vigilance. So cool is your ability to, when things are hot, you're able to keep a level head. So if combat starts during a tense situation, people with higher cool have better initiative because they're not panicking, right? And they're more prepared to react. Whereas someone with high vigilance, they're just they're hard to catch by surprise, like they're just ready to go. So they're not necessarily keeping a cool head in a tense situation, but if you jump around a corner at them, they get on their feet very quickly, or they're just always kind of on the lookout for danger, I guess. So the ghosts, as you would imagine, are non-corporeal. So if they're not wearing their special suit, they have all the, they can't interact with their environment very well. And I think they constantly take strain if they're not in their home dimension. Oh, they can't heal normally. They have an ethereal awareness. You can spend story points, which I'll talk about in a different video, just know things that are going on around you, like are there people hiding behind a door. The Druwa, of course, are going to be the psychic snakes. So they start with a rank in discipline. They can read minds, so they can do an opposed discipline check to know what somebody's thinking. All right, Gashlai. So these are the Embers of Mulat. So they're fire people, and of course, they're going to be. They start with high mechanics, so they're really good at mechanics. They have to wear an enviro suit as well, just like the ghosts. So otherwise, they can only exist in certain temperatures, or else they start taking strain. They do extra damage with melee and brawl weapons, of course, because they're very hot. Con, start with negotiation, and they can spend story points to reduce strain in social combat. And I haven't done a lot of social skill checks, sorry. So if people are doing social skill checks on them, like I suppose this could be coercion and stuff like that. They can reduce, how much strain they take. So I guess they're harder to crack under pressure, I guess. That's not something I really played with before. So I think if I had a con in the group, though, obviously you want to try to create situations where they can use their skills. So I'd have to look into that if that were to happen. Humans are average starting stats, but they heal their endurance. They have good endurance, so they heal their strain more easily. They get a couple free non-career skills at the beginning. And once per session, they can spend a story point. I think I'll just have to explain what a story point is. So a story point is in some games, it's like it could be a fate point or a force point if you're playing Star Wars, but it's basically you start with a certain number of tokens, and the GM has some, and then the players have some, and you can spend them for certain effects, like upgrading. Like if I'm the GM, I could spend it to upgrade the difficulty of a task, or if I'm a player, I could spend it to decrease the difficulty or to upgrade my ability roll. You could spend a token if you're a player to have a common item on you that, let's say you run into a cliff and you need a rope, and you didn't bring one with you. You could use a story point to say, oh, it's a good thing I remembered to bring that rope from the ship, so that sort of thing. So anyways, a lot of the skills here will also involve story points. So the players, and what happens with the story point is you give it to the other side. So if you're a player, you give it to the GM, so then they can use it some time, or vice versa. But anyways, you can spend these on some abilities. So like this, they can spend a story point to use when you have to do a check, like a skill check, like let's say you're making an astrogation check, I can use any skill with it. So I somehow, I don't know how, I'm gonna have to have an example to narrate that, but it's kind of like I can use any of my skill checks once per session to make a different skill check. So it's like, I'm really, really knowledgeable, but I'm not a very good boxer, but this guy's trying to beat me up. So I'm going to use my knowledge skill to box for like one roll. From what I'm understanding of that. Okay, so the Hylar, as you would imagine, are very brainy. Like the Gashly and the Kraus, they also need enviro suits normally. But I think some of them are, yeah, you choose here, species variants. You can have ones that function normally in air. You could have water-breathing ones. They start with obviously 2 ranks of knowledge of their choice, and they can get up to 3 points during character creation. Usually you have to cap it 2. They start with very high intellect, so easy to get these guys to 5 intellect. You can also spend story points to make a skill count as an intellect roll. Yeah, you can be aquatic. There's our Letnev again, we've already talked about. So the Nor, as you would imagine, very physically based. So they start with rank in athletics. They've rugged biology, so they're really good at, just by spending a story point, they can heal critical injuries. That's pretty good, actually. NasRoka, so I was kind of curious how they were going to do this in the game. So they've actually found a way that you can have the NasRoka. So if you don't know the NasRoka, they're these big cat people. They're kind of big. They're not too smart. And then there's these little fellas who are really smart, but not very strong. And they were both kind of getting pushed around by the other races of the galaxy. But they found out that if they teamed up, they could do great things. And so they kind of formed a symbiotic society where there's like every Nas is always with a Roka, like they're always in pairs. And they don't marry each other, but if they get married, then you're marrying both of the partners. So it's kind of, a NasRoka pair marries this NasRoka pair. Each Nas is married to each Nas, each Roka is married to each Roka. And don't ask me which is which, because I forget. Oh, I guess the Roka is the cat. You can tell by the Brawn, then the intellect. The little guy is going to be the Nas, and the big guy is going to be the Roka. So they have, they start with skills in computers and coordination. It's a lot of stuff here. So every time you do an action, you have to decide which one of them is doing it. So I think it's just a way that you can actually have kind of a more well-rounded sort of a character by actually playing 2 people at once. But if one dies, you either want to retire your character or you're just playing with a handicap, a very depressed character with a game handicap. Here's the SAR. They're very cunning, not very strong. They start with a lot of XP, though. They also get a free rank in astrocartography, meaning they're basically pretty good with navigating a ship. They're also good at fixing things. They have this resourceful ability. The Shakrai, so this is the Argent Flight folk. You'll notice here they like bows. They have good agility, so they're going to be good with ranged combat, obviously. They get a point in coordination. You can add, once per session, you can spend one of your story points to add 2 successes and 2 advantage to an agility check. So that'd be good for a nice sniping shot or something like that, maybe. The Titans, I was curious how they were getting the Titans in. Now, the Titans vary in size from, large to just enormous. Starting with 4 Brawn. So if you want to get somebody with 5 Brawn, this is probably the one. But they only start with 60 experience. Still, that's getting yourself to Brawn 5 real quick if you just want to tank with this guy. They get a free rank in discipline. Their silhouette 2. So silhouette affects how easy it is to shoot someone. So if you're really, really big, it's harder for you to shoot somebody that's really, really small compared to you, or vice versa. It's easier for a small person to hit a big person. And the encumbrance threshold is increased, so it's how much gear they can carry. They are biomechanical. They don't need to breathe. They don't. Okay, and the Winu, a lot of willpower and presence. Oh, so they start with a leadership rank. If somebody tries to target them with a skill check, including combat checks and social skill checks, they can spend a story point to add 3 failures to the result. So that's pretty nice. So once per session, but you can make a powerful hit into a miss. All right, X-Jaw. So these guys, this is the turtle folk. Pretty decent brawn, pretty low agility, as you would imagine, low cunning, as you would imagine, not quick on their feet. They get vigilance and extremely tough, so they can spend a story point to double their soap for one attack, like once per session. All right, and the Israel, we can already guess they're going to be very sneaky and good at stealth. All right, so yeah, they get a free rank in stealth. Their silhouette is 0. They're very small. So I think with the difference of 2, I believe the Titans would have a difficult time shooting an Israel. An Israel would have a much easier time shooting back at a Titan. All right, so that's the game. The ones that are included in the game here, I think it would be very easily though to extrapolate from this. Like if you wanted to do Yin, basically a human with, you know, religious zealot human with a different backstory. Same with Mentag. You could just use, you know, you might want to make some social distinctions between them, but you know, Mentag can be basically almost any faction, except like the Titans. Yeah, easy to adapt that. So that is a look at each of the character types offered in Embers of the Imperium. So I hope that was somewhat informative for you. So you have a wonderful time.